Alright, well here's the start to part 4 of the 1951 Ford F1 rebuild series. These are the front suspension parts, the upper and lower control arms, the airbag hats that mount the airbag to the spring pocket, and then the mounting bars for the upper control arms. Not sure what you call them. Anyway, so parts have been surface rust was taken off of them, and they were washed with grease remover from 415, and then they were metal prepped, and now they've been 2 coats of 415, and now they're sitting here curing. Hopefully tomorrow we'll actually be able to assemble the front suspension and say we're done with the front suspension. So let's go back in and take a look at the frame. One thing I want to clear up from whenever I terminated the last video, I showed you some spots where the texture just wasn't quite, or the finish wasn't right on this 415. The answer is, I messed up. You need to be sure and put on nice light even coats as much as possible, and that helps with the surface finish. Going for semi-gloss, we're pretty good now, but certainly put it on thin, and put it on thin again, and as many times you feel is reasonable. This is 2 coats for the most part, but then because of the surface finish on the top of the frame, I went with the 3rd coat, light coat, to hopefully improve the finish to more of a semi-gloss appearance. It's not quite perfect, but again, you live and you learn. Also installed the steering rack, which wasn't here I think on the last video. This is a power rack and pinion, so we've got the 2 terminal ends here, and then the steer box, the steer column connection, and the 2 power steering fluid connection points. So that's installed, hopefully final, and we're ready to go in with this front suspension. One of the reasons that I haven't done it before now is my spindles. Originally I ordered stock spindles for this thing, and then changed my mind, and Clay Mullen, the owner at Full Tilt Street Rods, was kind enough to exchange them for me. They hadn't been used yet. It's been bolted up, mocked up once, but nothing more, nothing significant. So he swapped these out for me. You can tell there's 2-inch drops by this machine section here in the back, and so now we've got 2-inch drops. I think those will give us a better profile for the truck, better ride height for the front. Anyway, so we got those now. So once the front suspension parts are dry, 415's cured, then we're ready to go back together with this, with the front suspension, or go together with the front suspension, I guess would be more correct way of saying it. Then the next thing we're going to do, and a significant part of this video, will be associated with building a new cross member. Right now I've got the thing covered with a big plate of steel that I'm using to make this cross member. Let's get to where the sun's not hitting us. So you can't see that cross member, but I'll show it to you next segment. Right now what we're doing is we're cutting out parts, and we're going to build, not a great drawing, but we're going to build a cross member that goes in the C-channel of the frame, braced down to the bottom of the frame. And this is just to replace cross member that's there. It's in pretty rugged shape. So we got dimensions for it from the triangulated from the back frame horns on the rear of the frame, and so we should be able to place it quite accurately. Also, we want to get the height right. It's 2 inches of height above the frame rail, so we've got that now. So just a matter of putting it all together, and or cutting it all out rather, and then welding it up. We're using our Hobart plasma torch there. You'll see down on the bottom of our welding cart there's a Hobart plasma cutter. It's very small, but it works for this steel well enough. This steel we're using is 11 gauge. It's leftover from my daughter's welding project for the fair, and it's 0.12 inch thickness, which is plenty enough for this cross member. Cross member is going to be reinforced, so it's not going to have any trouble. So we want to do that before we start on the rear suspension. So that's where we are. That's where we're going. We'll get back with you in a few. Well, we finished up the front suspension, at least for this phase of the rebuild. Obviously, brakes aren't hooked up. Wheel bearings aren't even packed. So it's going to come back apart, but just mocking everything, and we're good. You'll notice a lot of sag in it. That's because there's no weight on it. And so hopefully with weight on it, everything will come back up to the right dimensions, right heights. You got some temporary tube on here for the airbags for now. We'll go with stainless steel tube to the airbags when we pipe the truck, plumb the truck. So we've got both front suspension, both sides of the front suspension installed, racks in place, steer knuckles hooked up. So we're pretty well there on the front end, I believe. And so until we set this thing off the frame, shouldn't be much more of anything to do. Or so we set this thing off the sawhorses, rather, when we go to set it down back on tires. The cross member that I was discussing in the last segment is this cross member here. And I'm going to try to show you the damage as best I can up under here. But basically, it is almost corroded all the way, well, it is corroded all the way through almost the entire width. And whenever I turn the frame over to do the work I did with 415 and wire wheeling and all those goodies, the frame would just flex right there. And so I want this thing to go. Needs to be replaced. Doesn't necessarily have to be of the same design, but I'm going to go ahead and make it with the same rise, the same hole in the middle. I don't believe anything in the bed bolts on it, but just in case it does, we're going to go ahead and do it. Another good reason. This is not rusted through, but it's rusted really heavily, and so let's go ahead and get rid of it. We've got 4 rivets on top, and we've got 2 rivets down here on bottom inside of there. So we got some rivet grinding to do to start, and then whenever we build the new cross member, it's going to be built a couple of pieces like this. Get in there, a couple of pieces like this. So it'll give us the same profile, basically, that we have there, and it's going to be the same, about the same width. It's going to be 6 inches wide, and so we're just going to make us a 3-sided box, and then we're going to brace it as well off the bottom of the frame, like this one's braced off the bottom of the frame. So anyway, let's get on with getting this cross member cut out of here. We managed to get the old cross member out, knock the rivets out of it, cut the bottom supports out of it, and then we cleaned up the frame area a little bit just to get a feel for it. And it looks like got some pretty substantial corrosion, rust pitting right in this area. So much so it looks like there's actually a crack here in the bottom rail of the frame. So we're going to sleep on it, but we're going to come back at this tomorrow and at a minimum reinforce this area. Not exactly sure yet how we'll reinforce it. Will we cut it out, replace some metal? Will we just patch over the top? I really don't like patching over the top too much, so probably going to end up cutting this out and then putting a piece of this 11 gauge across there, which is a bit more than it has right now, but we'd like that to be pretty substantial if we can. Past here on back looks okay. It's a little pitting, but it's not too deep mostly, and so we just need to replace this little section of the frame. No big deal. And then we begin the fabrication and test fitting of this new cross member, and I think it's going to work out fine. We're going to end up rosette welding here through these holes in the frame. We'll end up filling these holes and the holes on the bottom as well. So, but for the night, we're going to shut it down, and we'll come back at it another time and finish this video. We have fabbed up the cross member that we're going to put in here. You can see I've got it clamped in place. It's basically centered up. We took the center line of the prior cross member, marked it here on the frame, and then we lined up the center line on the new cross member, and there you go. So we're going to ultimately see if I can do this, have a piece of plate under here that's going to come up at an angle like so, just to reinforce that bottom portion of the rail. So we're going to go ahead and end this video at this point, because the next thing we need to do is we're going to take this, we're going to clean up under the frame rail, clean up around where we're going to need to weld this in, and we're going to use some weld through primer. We're going to go ahead and weld it partway in at least. We're going to rosette weld through the holes in the top of the frame rail, and then we're going to also weld here along the frame rail. And after we reset the width, it's about a 1/4 inch spread right now, so we'll reset that width back to correct, and then do that tack in, or that weld in, partial weld in. And then we're going to flip the frame, and we're going to work on these lower rails on the frame where I showed you before that it's been significantly rusted. We're going to take out about 12 inches of the lower flange of the frame, and we're going to replace it with basically the same material. It's 12 gauge or 10 gauge, no, 11 gauge steel, so it's about 0.12 inches. The actual frame lip thickness there is about 0.1415, so I think 0.12 will be fine, especially once we reinforce it with that downcoming bracket. So I'm comfortable with this repair. We'll just need to flip the frame to do it. Before I flip the frame, I want to go ahead and get this piece welded in, because the frame does have a lot of flex right now. So anyway, one thing you might notice, the size of this cross member and the size of this one. I actually built this cross member a bit larger with the intention that we're going to mount some equipment here. My hope is that up inside or in the front, I'm not sure which yet, of this structure, we're going to mount our air control valves for the airbag system. Hoping also probably we're going to mount, thinking that we're probably going to mount our air tank system compressors in this whole area. And so I just wanted to have a bit extra space here for mounting surface to mount some of that equipment. I don't know yet how it's going to turn out. Hadn't gotten that far, but we'll at least have a little bit of real estate. This thing's not terribly heavy, even though it's a bit larger than the other one. So I'm comfortable with it. We're looking good. So we'll catch you on part 5, and hopefully in part 5 we'll begin the process of repairing the bottom flange on the frame rails back here on the back of the truck. Take care.